Hello, this will be a quick video lesson on our Chinese nature poems from the Middle Period in Chinese history. Now, as far as Chinese poems we're going to be looking at, I do want us to look at a PowerPoint that's going to overview some of the information. So, as far as the Chinese Middle Period, we are going to be looking at literature pretty much ranging from 220 to 1299. We're going to be looking at two poets. We're going to be looking first at Tai Qin and then also later Li Bo, which will be discussing several poems from those authors. Now, as far as what's interesting about the Chinese Middle Period, it's in stark contrast to kind of the European Middle Ages. Now, you'll note that a lot of literary works we looked at from the European Middle Ages, such as Dante's Inferno, also Everyman, as well as the Decameron, all of those had sort of a very dark element to them, kind of emotional as far as their tone. Most of them did deal with, of course, psychomachia, kind of internal battles within the soul between good and evil. There usually is some type of Christian, especially Catholic Christian reference in those works as well. But you're going to notice in the Chinese Middle Period, we're not looking necessarily in sort of the darkness. It's more of kind of a positive, kind of tone that we have within these works. The attempt to overcome those terrible situations in our lives. Now, we are going to be looking at different belief systems, but we're not going to be looking at Christian belief systems. We're actually going to be looking at three different main belief systems during the Middle Period, which are Confucianism, also Buddhism, as well as Taoism, which we'll be looking at those as well. Now, what's really interesting about this particular time period, as far as China's history, they were really only unified at one point in history as far as under a specific dynasty. The first emperor of China, who was, of course, Qin, he essentially unified China for a short while, but unfortunately, after his demise, we had a lot of political turmoil in China. There were several dynasties, especially between the north and the south, and they were constantly feuding for power. Now, what's quite unique is during kind of political turmoil, great literature springs forth from that. And a lot of that literature sprung forth from all the different belief systems during that particular time period. One of the major belief systems was Confucianism. And of course, this origins from the Chinese philosopher Confucius, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. This, in many ways, it was a philosophical system in a sense where you had an emphasis on humans cultivating their virtues, aiming for moral perfection. Most individuals were influenced through Confucianism to work in some type of public service. What you're going to find interesting is with our first poem, Tai Qin, he wants to shift away from Confucianism. He feels restricted by Confucianism and by public service. He wants to more gain freedom through more ideals that are in respect to Taoism, which we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, another belief system that was very prevalent during the Middle Period in China's history was Buddhism. Now, this kind of, came into play because there wasn't a huge political kind of power during that time period. It did open up the door to more varied religious belief systems. Essentially, Gautama was an individual who came in. He came in, and you'll notice with this other slide, he came in with other Buddhist missionaries from India. And through their mission, they spread the word of Buddhism. And then it became a very prevalent belief system. Now, as far as Buddhism, it is essentially perceived as a path of salvation achieved through insight, sort of an ultimate perception of the nature of reality. The way to attain that perception is through devotional practices, ceremonies, rituals, meditation, physical exercises, where you would remove yourself from the suffering of a worldly existence and find more an inner peace through those acts, in a sense. Now, you're going to notice that several of our authors, they do have more, seemingly kind of Buddhist belief systems, but they do veer away from some of those belief systems as well. Now, as far as with Buddhism, I do need to mention one particular concept because it's going to be very important to one of our poems, which is Yearning, which was written by Li Po, which we'll be looking at that later. You do need to understand the Four Noble Truths that are kind of the root in the belief system of Buddhism. First is the truth of dukkha. Now, dukkha is just essentially the belief system that life is inherently disappointing. and it is full of suffering and anxiety, which you may feel that you are within dukkha right now. Also, you need to understand the truth of the origin of dukkha. In Buddhism, it's the belief that you have this suffering because you have human desires and you're constantly yearning for those desires. Now, as far as the next concept is the truth of the cessation of dukkha, how you can stop dukkha and that suffering, which is to repress that human desire. That's where those rituals, those prayers, those devotions come in to distract yourself from, of course, those worldly desires. And then finally, to the fourth noble truth is the truth of the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. And this is again where those devotional practices help you suppress it. Now, in order to be a successful Buddhist, you have to essentially cease having worldly desires. It's not until you cease having worldly desires that you won't cease your cycle of dying, being reincarnated, whether you're reincarnated as, a human or an animal or whatever being that it might be. But in your existence, once you have achieved, okay, a cessation of dukkha or of desire, you later upon your death will receive nirvana, which is that ultimate meeting, okay, of kind of oneness with the universe. Now, this was not the only belief system during this time period. There was another belief system which I mentioned earlier, which is Taoism. Now, I know this starts with a T, but it's pronounced with a D. Now, Taoism focuses in on the nature and human beings' correspondence with nature, kind of that connection that's there. Taoists usually focus on, kind of beliefs such as compassion, humility, liberty, spontaneity. Two poets, again, that we're going to be discussing in this lesson who followed Taoist principles were Tao Jian and also Li Bo. Now, both of them really advocate the belief system of Taoism, but they reject Confucianism. Now, as far as Buddhism, Tao Qin, he seems to kind of veer a little bit against some Buddhist elements, but Li Po does seem to have some belief systems that would be Buddhist as far as his perceptions of the world. Now, as far as Chinese poetry, whether it is from a Taoist or a Buddhist viewpoint, you're going to notice that a lot of the Chinese poetry of the middle period, it really emphasized individualism, eccentricity, okay? I know many of us have been hermits and very reclusive during this trying time period, but that idea of being a recluse or a hermit, that was something idolized and admired during the middle period, okay? It was actually even more respected than that Confucianist belief system of being a public servant. Also, especially within Chinese poetry, you're going to see that nature is really more important than sort of your political life, your appreciation of it as an individual, and you find solidarity in the beauty of landscapes. Now, you're going to notice a lot of artwork during this particular time period. It is individuals within nature enjoying it, and that reflects kind of those belief systems of Taoism, especially. Now, we're going to be looking again at two poets today. The first poet is Tao Qin. Now, he was again a Taoist poet, okay? His poems often show this appreciation of the simple life of a rural community, kind of a farmer's life. And he sentimentalized that idea of a peasant farmer's life. He romanticized it. He loved that existence. He wanted to live that existence rather than, of course, the life of a politician. Also, he, during his lifetime, worked several government positions, but you can sense, especially from his poem, The Return, which we're going to mention in just a moment, he felt it kind of went against his personal nature to be restricted within that position of a government, kind of a government figure in a sense. He worked as a city magistrate, and he spent most of his life wanting to move away from those government positions and to go back to the small world of a farming community. So he wanted to be the hermit. He wanted to be the recluse. Now, you're going to notice your first poem that you're going to be looking at from Tao Qin is on page 1294, and that, of course, is The Return. Now, you're going to notice in kind of the introduction, the prologue to The Return, you're going to notice that in the introduction of The Return, essentially Tao Qin is talking about the fact that he has had a death in the family, and because of that death in the family, he is being forced to leave his position as a magistrate, a city official, and he's being forced to come back home. But you're going to notice, even though he's forced, he actually sees this as sort of a welcoming event, because you'll notice in the opening lines you can tell that he has not been happy with his decision to work as a government official. Notice he says, this is in the introduction, he says, because my instinct is all for freedom and will not brook discipline or restraint. Okay, so you'll notice he says his instinct is to be one that has freedom. Notice being a government official restricts that freedom. He sees it almost as a prison. He says, and will not brook discipline or restraint. I mean, and that's the heart of a Confucianist politician, that restraint and discipline in your lifetime. He says, hunger and cold may be sharp, but this going against myself really sickens me. So he says, you know, I'm hungry, I'm cold when I don't have money. I'm having to work as a magistrate to, fund his own food, shelter, also for his family. But he's like, listen, what's worse though is being sickened by going against who you are at your essence. And I'm sure many of you have probably worked jobs that you disliked. Maybe you loathe them to your very core. Going into that job day in, day out, it can feel kind of like a slow death where you feel like you're spiritually or just physically or mentally drained by the time you get back. This is how Tao Qin perceived this job as a magistrate and other government positions during his lifetime. So notice he says, whenever I have been involved in official life, meaning as a politician, he says, I was mortgaging myself to my mouth and my belly, kind of like he was giving up himself for eating, for the food on the table. So he feels like this working in a government position goes against everything that he is at his core. Now notice he uses some really beautiful imagery. He also references, nature and his appreciation of it as he's leaving this urban political life for a more rural existence back home on his family's farm. So you'll notice the first few lines. Now we're shifting from the summary to the actual poem. He says, to get out of this and go back home. Notice that this, I mean, I'm sure all of us have been in this, that bad situation, that job that you dislike, that you can't stand for another day. He's like, to get out of this and go back home. He wants to go back home to that rural existence. He says, my fields and gardens will be overgrown with weeds. I must be back. So we have this image of his farm, his garden, his crops are overgrown with weeds because he hasn't been there. But also we can kind of sense he feels like he's sort of full of weeds. He's not himself. And he says, it was my own doing that made my mind my body slaves. Now notice he's accountable. He's not blaming anyone but himself. He's like, listen, I made my mind. He made the decision to go into the city and to work as a government official. He says, my body slave. He needed food. He needed shelter. He was a slave to those necessities. So he gave up what he truly wanted to live in the country to go and work in the city. He says, there's no remedying the past. He's like, listen, I can't make right necessarily what I did wrong in the past, but he says there's hope in the future. For him, hope is going back home to his family's farm. He says, after all, have not gone far down the wrong road. Okay, notice that image of the wrong road, the path. So he's saying, hey, I did take that path into civil life, but I can backtrack and go to my rural existence again. And then notice we have this image of him actually returning home. He says, I catch sight of my cottage, filled with joy I run. Notice that image of going back home. He says, the servant boy comes to welcome me. My little son waits at the door, and he's reunited with his family who he left behind. Okay, now notice the rest of this poem, he essentially is just reminiscing about everything he's missed. He talks about this little space, which is his home, probably very different than the house that he lived in the city. He also says of the birds, they're weary of flying. And notice that image of the birds, it almost is a metaphor for himself. He's a bird who's flown from his coop, from his home, and he's ready to come back home. And he talks about a lonely pine tree. Now, what's ironic is, although the pine tree is lonely because it's by itself, you can sense that's what Tao Te Ching wants from his life. He wants a lonely, quiet existence, not filled with people and individuals. Now, you'll notice he wants to continue the rest of his life in this environment, in a rural existence. He says there will be work to do in the West Fields, and he wants that farmer's life. And notice he says, Some little time are we granted human form in the world. Let us follow the inclinations of the heart. Now, this is where he's going against a Buddhist inclination. His heart desire is to stay home in this world existence. So understand this idea of home. Thank you.